Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. Today we're going to talk about the law and some of the doctrines that play into the defense in the Hannah Reed case. And I want to make sure that you understand the law in every jurisdiction is different. And although I have done the research and I believe that what I'm going to tell you here is absolutely accurate for New Mexico, I'm not a New Mexico lawyer, so it is possible that I could be wrong, but I don't believe that I am. So we're going to talk about whether Hannah Gutierrez Reed has a defense to the charge on the basis, first, of a lack of knowledge, and second, on the basis of a lack of culpable negligence, and third, because there is an independent intervening cause in the case. These three legal reasons, which could be briefed and decided by motion as much as by anything else, are the three things that I think make this case very unattractive for the prosecution and may actually wind up making it more difficult to hold Alec Baldwin responsible. A couple of observations that may not prove out to be based on the evidence to be admitted at trial, but the first is that Hannah Gutierrez Reed did not know that there were live rounds on the set, or alternatively, did not have any reason to know that they were intermixed with dummy rounds. In other words, even if she knew there were live rounds on the set, which she might very well have, if she was in charge of the cart and the props, then she might not know that someone had intermixed live rounds with dummy rounds. That's important because one of the elements of the crime of involuntary manslaughter in New Mexico is essentially knowledge. Involuntary manslaughter in New Mexico is defined as the unlawful killing of a human being without malice aforethought. In other words, you didn't intend to do this. You may not even have meant to do it. You weren't angry at this other person. There was an accident and someone died, and you had a very high level of negligence. So that's pretty much where we are with Hannah Gutierrez Reed. Now, the specific elements required to prove involuntary manslaughter in New Mexico include an act. In this case, the prosecution must prove that the defendant committed an unlawful act or engaged in negligent conduct that resulted, meaning caused, the death of another person. Note, this is not mere ordinary negligence. This is a heightened level of negligence called criminal negligence. Causation. There must be a causal connection between the defendant's unlawful act or the negligent conduct and the death of the victim. That doesn't mean that there has to be a mere connection. Rather, what it means is there must be proximate cause, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Whatever the act is, it must not only be the cause in fact, but it has to be the proximate cause of the injury, and the touchstone of proximate causation is foreseeability. Now keep in mind that foreseeability is always determined after the fact, and hindsight is 20/20. After something happens, you can say, well, that was foreseeable, but in many cases, prior to that event happening, it wasn't foreseeable. Now, in my opinion, there are multiple reasons why there is no proximate causation here. We'll get to that in a little bit. Finally, lack of malice, meaning unlike voluntary manslaughter or murder, where you have somebody who intends to do this and wants to do this either because they're suddenly angry and just striking out, or because they just really hate this person and they plan to do something to them. In the case of involuntary manslaughter, the killing has to be unintentional or accidental, and I think you have that here. And then you have recklessness or criminal negligence. Involuntary manslaughter in New Mexico may involve reckless or criminally negligent behavior on the part of the defendant, leading to the death of another person, or again, causing the death of another person. But here it's important to differentiate between ordinary negligence and criminal negligence. Ordinary negligence refers to the failure to exercise that degree of care that a reasonable person would exercise in similar circumstances. In civil law, ordinary negligence typically forms the basis for a negligence lawsuit, where the plaintiff seeks compensation for damages that are caused by the defendant's lack of reasonable care. For example, in the ordinary negligence context, you have a situation where Joe goes out to dig a hole to put a tree in his front yard, and he digs this hole in his front yard, and then it becomes too dark outside for him to plant the tree that evening, so he leaves the hole uncovered, and a couple of kids walking through his yard that night on their way home fall into the hole and one of them breaks their leg. That's ordinary negligence because he could very easily have prevented that simply by putting up a cone or some other thing that would have let somebody know there was a hole there. That's ordinary negligence. The guy wasn't reckless. He just made a bad decision to not fill the hole back in before he went inside. It's important to emphasize that negligence is also predicated on a duty of care. In other words, you have a duty of care that you owe to the plaintiff. And in this case, Hannah Gutierrez Reed would have a duty of care to responsibly handle and supply firearms. There's no question that a duty of care is there. And again, all of that deals with ordinary negligence. Criminal negligence, on the other hand, involves a higher degree of negligence, and that rises to the level of a criminal offense. Criminal negligence involves a reckless disregard for the safety of others or a failure to perceive a substantial and unjustifiable risk that a reasonable person would recognize. Keep in mind, the failure to perceive a substantial and unjustifiable risk requires the ability to perceive it. Thus, if somebody doesn't know that live rounds are on the set and that there is a danger that they might be put in the firearms, then they do not have the knowledge and the ability to perceive this unjustifiable risk, and that's because they are not held to a standard of omniscience. As to recklessness, that is behavior that is so careless that it is considered an extreme departure from the care a reasonable person would exercise in similar circumstances. Well, if a reasonable person would load only from a box marked dummy shells and was unaware that there were live rounds mixed in there, then it would not be an extreme departure for them to load from the same box every time because they would not have the knowledge that there were live rounds in there. So again, it's going to be exceptionally hard for the state to prove recklessness and the ability to perceive an unjustifiable risk. Because, again, in order to be reckless, you need to know someone sprinkled really live rounds in with the dummies. Otherwise, you're not going to be reckless. Now, the criminal negligence standard usually requires a higher standard of proof than ordinary negligence, and it may involve a showing that the defendant's actions were so reckless or so grossly negligent that they amount to this criminal offense. The distinction between ordinary negligence and criminal negligence lies in the degree of carelessness or recklessness involved, as well as the legal consequences that can follow. So criminal negligence can result in criminal charges, and that's why it is at a higher standard. Again, you have to prove a higher standard of negligence because otherwise every single mistake would be a criminal act, and that simply is not the way we want to live our lives in this country. Now we turn to the part of the case that the state really doesn't want to talk about, and that is the actions of Alec Baldwin. Now, Hannah Gutierrez Reed can't call Alec Baldwin in his case because he's going to have the Fifth Amendment to protect him. But what she can do is she can use the video of him when he talked to ABC News, when he talked to George Stephanopoulos. In that situation, she can bring that in because it is a statement of somebody who is at fault in this case. And she can use that, I believe, to show what was going through Alec Baldwin's mind and to show the fact that he indeed did point the weapon directly at Helena Hutchins. In order to prosecute Baldwin, they are going to need to show that he was reckless and that they have that in spades based on that video with George Stephanopoulos, as well as the video that was being recorded on the day of the shooting. Now, keep in mind, Hannah Gutierrez Reed offered to train him. He refused to be trained. He has long claimed to be an expert on firearms and shooting, and he disregarded industry standards that you never, ever point a firearm at a human being. Even on an active set where one actor is shooting at another actor, the gun is actually pointed away from the other person. And this little example here shows how it works. The camera is positioned at an angle to the two parties so that when the one actor is firing at the other, it looks like he's pointing his firearm directly at the other person. And the other person, the same thing. But the camera is not showing that if you were behind the person who's shooting, instead of shooting at the target or the person, they're shooting over to the left or over to the right. And that's done for safety, and it's done universally. Here, the doctrine of dependent and independent intervening cause comes into play. In the context of involuntary manslaughter, the difference between a dependent intervening cause and an independent intervening cause is as follows. A dependent intervening cause is one that arises as a direct result of the defendant's initial wrongful or negligent act. What that means is that it was a subsequent event that was foreseeable consequence of the defendant's actions. In cases of involuntary manslaughter, if the chain of events leading to the death of the victim was set in motion by the defendant's unlawful or criminally negligent conduct, and the intervening cause was a reasonable and foreseeable result of that conduct, it may be considered a dependent intervening cause, in which case it does not cut off the chain of events or the chain of causation in that situation. Clearly, this is what the state is going to argue. They're going to argue that the shooting of Helena Hutchins was the foreseeable consequence of Hannah Gutierrez Reed's negligence. In this case, there's a real problem with that, because in order to believe that it was foreseeable, you would have to expect that she knew that a guy who said he knew everything there was to know about firearms and didn't need training on the gun is going to blow past not only the safety check of the gun to make sure that it doesn't have live rounds in it. He needed to do that himself. You never trust another person. When I go to the range and somebody hands me a firearm, or somebody actually they don't hand me a firearm, they lay it down on the table and I pick it up, I immediately drop the magazine, rack the slide, and make sure there is nothing in that firearm, and then I load the firearm myself. And the reason I do that is because that's what the protocol is. That's how you take a firearm from someone else. You always check it. You can never assume that any gun is unloaded, and in fact, that's the first rule of gun safety. You always treat every gun as if it's loaded. So to believe that it's foreseeable, you have to expect that, this guy who's supposedly an expert just going to blow past all the rules of gun safety, and then, because you're familiar with the way things work on a movie set, you have to assume that he's going to point the gun directly at somebody and then play with the hammer and the trigger. I don't know why anybody would ever think that that would happen. I don't think it's foreseeable. Would it be foreseeable going forward? Yeah, now it's certainly foreseeable because it's happened. But up to that time, it had not happened, and it was not foreseeable. Again, I'm giving you my opinion here. It's not necessarily something you can take to the bank, but that's what I think. So that puts us into this independent intervening cause, which is one that is not a direct result of the defendant's actions. Here, it's a direct result of Baldwin's actions, and it breaks the chain of causation between Hannah Gutierrez Reed's conduct and the victim's death. In cases of involuntary manslaughter, if an independent intervening cause is deemed to have caused the death of the victim, and it was not reasonably foreseeable by the defendant at the time of their initial negligent act, it may not be attributed to the defendant for the purposes of determining guilt. Understanding that distinction is crucial in determining whether the defendant can be held responsible for involuntary manslaughter based on the causation element of the crime. Now, it's pretty clear that Reed has good lawyers and that they've done the legal work necessary to give her a good defense. I hope that when the time comes for the judge to issue jury instructions in this case, he understands these distinctions and he understands the evidence that's been admitted. In researching this a little bit further, I found these jury instructions for involuntary manslaughter. And in this case, the instruction 1 is Hannah Gutierrez Reed loaded the gun with live rounds. That's probably the only act that they can charge. 2, Hannah Gutierrez Reed should have known of the danger involved by live rounds, but again, you have to prove knowledge. 3, Hannah Gutierrez Reed acted with willful disregard for the safety of others. And again, willful disregard would be predicated on knowledge. You have to know of the danger. 4, Hannah Gutierrez's act caused the death of Helena Hutchins. And again, there you get into the issues of intervening cause, and then this happened in New Mexico. So these are the elements that will be in the jury instructions. There will have to be other jury instructions for things like intervening cause and knowledge and causation and that sort of thing. And those will be the actual jury instructions that make a difference in this case. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of the channel. We've grown quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. I want to thank everybody who has subscribed. It means a lot to me. Hopefully I will continue to be able to offer you content that you will find useful and hopefully accurate. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments down below or email me at the address above. Like, share, subscribe, you know all the stuff we ask you to do. And if you have the opportunity today, please go out of your way and do a kindness for someone. Doesn't have to be a big kindness. You don't have to buy them a new car, but maybe you can buy them lunch. At any rate, have a great day, and if you would, be sure to catch me down here at the beach tomorrow. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.